Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. Hope you're all doing well. So today is session 3 of our Sutta study course about the transition years. And we will continue reading the Mahāparinibbāna Sutta that we began last time. But before we start, I will chant the Namo Tassa as usual. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome to everybody who has joined. Hello, Aaron. Hello, Jens. Hello, Poonam, Kumu, and Jayanta. Nice to see you. We will continue today with chapter 13 of the Mahāparinibbāna Sutta, entitled An Obvious Hint. And if you want to read along, there is a link in the description box. And I will be reading from Bhante Sujato's translation. So, chapter 13, An Obvious Hint. Then the Buddha roped up in the morning, and taking his bowl and robe, entered Vesali for alms. Then after the meal, on his return from alms round, he addressed Venerable Ananda. Ananda, get your sitting cloth. Let's go to the Chapala shrine for the day's meditation. Yes, sir, replied Ananda. Taking his sitting cloth, he followed behind the Buddha. Then the Buddha went up to the Chapala shrine, where he sat on the seat spread out. Ananda bowed to the Buddha and sat down to one side. The Buddha said to him, Ananda, Vesali is lovely, and the Udena, Gotamaka, Satamba, Bahuputta, Sarandada, and Chapala shrines are all lovely. Whoever has developed and cultivated the 4 bases of psychic power, made them a vehicle and a basis, kept them up, consolidated them, and properly implemented them, may, if they wish, live on for the eon or what's left of the eon. The realized one has developed and cultivated the 4 bases of psychic power, made them a vehicle and a basis, kept them up, consolidated them, and properly implemented them. If he wished, the realized one could live on for the eon or what's left of the eon. But Ananda didn't get it, even though the Buddha dropped such an obvious hint, such a clear sign. He didn't beg the Buddha, Sir, may the Blessed One please remain for the eon. May the Holy One please remain for the eon. That would be for the welfare and happiness of the people, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. For his mind was as if possessed by Mara. So here we have the Buddha claiming that if he wanted to, he could live on for the eon, and Ananda doesn't ask him to do that. So the word eon is the Pali word kappa, or the Sanskrit word kalpa, and it means the time it takes for one universe to expand and contract. So the lifespan of one universe. And of course, in Buddhism, there's not only this one universe. After our present universe, there will be the next universe expanding and contracting, and another one, and another one. And also before the present one, there were many universes before. So of course, it keeps on going. The cycle of samsara keeps on going until all eternity, unless we practice the Buddha's path and get out. So here, obviously, the Buddha says that he could live on for the eon, and it's a little bit difficult to make sense of this passage, obviously, because if we take it literal, it's kind of difficult to imagine. I mean, even if he has psychic powers and if he's able to keep this body viable to sustain life and to live on, obviously we know that our planet isn't going to last for that long, and our solar system isn't going to last for that long. And when our sun turns into a supernova, what is the Buddha's body going to do? Is it like going to float out in space without a planet, without oxygen, or what? What does it mean? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to us. So the commentary tries to resolve this obvious problem by saying that the word kappa here means 100 years instead of 1 eon. And most translators choose not to follow the commentary here. And we see Bhante Sujato hasn't followed the commentary. He just translated as eon because there is no other place anywhere in the canon where kappa would mean 100 years. It always means eon. So since there's no precedent, it doesn't make sense to translate it like this here either. There's just no other place where it would mean 100 years. So yeah, it's not likely that it was supposed to mean 100 years here. So why is this passage here? What does it mean? So the best way to understand this is by looking at what happened in the early Buddhist sangha. And after the Buddha's passing, what we see is that after people no longer had a personal contact with the Buddha, so after 1 or 2 generations, when people no longer personally had met the Buddha, there was a tendency to very much glorify the Buddha. And in the earliest texts, when we read the suttas, we see that the Buddha lived a fairly ordinary life. Of course, the Buddha was a very special person, and his dhamma is like amazing and very extraordinary. But the lifestyle that he lived was fairly ordinary. Like he went on alms round, he wore his robes, he lived in a small kuti, he wandered from place to place. And of course, like we hear that he had psychic powers and we see stories about that. But generally, his life is depicted as being pretty mundane and fairly ordinary. And then, but at the later traditions, we see that there was a strong tendency to glorify him and to add a huge amount of miracles and making everything very, very extraordinary. And if you do that, then of course you have to explain how come the Buddha just simply passed away like any other ordinary human being. And the way it's explained here is, well, he could have lived on for much longer, but Ananda messed up and Ananda didn't ask him. So that's one explanation why this passage needs to be here, in order to resolve that problem that originated after the later generations glorified the Buddha so much. And another possible explanation is that if we look at the early Sangha, it wasn't actually one monolithic uniform block. There were different tendencies in the Sangha and different people with different personalities and different styles of practice. So while the Buddha was still alive, he obviously served as a unifying figure, and he made the final decisions. So those tendencies didn't show up so prominently. But after he passed away, and when there was no more one unifying figure in the Sangha, then the different groups started to somehow struggle with each other a little bit to determine the future direction that the Buddhist Sangha should take. And one of the examples where we see that very prominently is in the account of the first council that we'll read in 3 weeks' time. And the first council is a meeting of monks that happened pretty much straight after the Buddha's parinibbana, a few months after the Buddha's parinibbana, where they collected the teachings, the suttas and the vinaya, to preserve them for later generations. So it was a very, very important event in Buddhist history. But in that story of the first council, we see very clearly that there were different groups in the Sangha, and 2 very prominent groups were the groups that are following practices that are ascribed to Mahākassapa. So Mahākassapa is one example for one group, and the other example for the other group is Ananda. And Mahākassapa, of course, is well known as being a very ascetic monk, very reclusive, living in the forest, very withdrawn from society, without having much contact with the general population, with the lay people. And Ananda is, of course, exemplifying another extreme, being very social, being very approachable, mingling a lot with lay people, and also giving a lot of Dhamma talks, and just being a very, very social monk. And it seems that these two groups kind of struggled a little bit with each other. And in the first council, we know that Mahākassapa convened the first council, and he also presided over the first council. And we see that Ananda was very badly criticized during the first council for various things. And one thing he was criticized for is this episode we have read about here now, for not asking the Buddha to live on for the eon. So this story could also be one example of those struggles in the early Sangha, and an attempt also to a little bit undermine the authority that Ananda had in the early Sangha in order to strengthen the position of different groups. So it's very likely that this kind of stories have a very, very mundane explanation, and there's no need to actually look for any kind of supernatural explanation for stories like this in the Mahāparinibbāna Sutta. So yeah, these are two possible explanations for this story here. If you have any questions, you can, I see some people have already left questions in the chat. You can leave more questions there. And we continue with the text. So a second and a third time, Ananda asks, the Buddha says the same thing, and Ananda again does not ask him to stay on. And finally, the Buddha got up and said to Venerable Ananda, "Go now, Ananda, at your convenience." "Yes, sir," replied Ananda. He rose from his seat, bowed, and respectfully circled the Buddha, keeping him on his right, before sitting at the root of a tree close by. And then, not long after Ananda had left, Mara the wicked went up to the Buddha, stood to one side, and said to him, "Sir, may the Blessed One now become fully extinguished. May the Holy One now become fully extinguished. Now is the time for the Buddha to become fully extinguished. Sir, you once made this statement, 'Wicked One, I will not become fully extinguished until I have monk disciples who are competent, educated, assured, learned, have memorized the teachings, and practice in line with the teachings. Not until they practice properly, living in line with the teaching. Not until they've learned their tradition and explain, teach, assert, establish, disclose, analyze, and make it clear. Not until they can legitimately and completely refute the doctrines of others that come up and teach with a demonstrable basis. Today, you do have such monk disciples. May the Blessed One now become fully extinguished. May the Holy One now become fully extinguished. Now is the time for the Buddha to become fully extinguished. Sir, you once made this statement, 'Wicked One, I will not become fully extinguished until I have none disciples who are competent, educated, assured, learned, have memorized the teachings and practice in line with the teachings. Not until they practice properly, living in line with the teaching. Not until they've learned their tradition and explain, teach, assert, establish, disclose, analyze, and make it clear. Not until they can legitimately and completely refute the doctrines of others that come up and teach with a demonstrable basis. Today, you do have such non-disciples. May the Blessed One now become fully extinguished. May the Holy One now become fully extinguished. Now is the time for the Buddha to become fully extinguished." And the same thing is repeated again for the laymen and the lay women. And then Mara says, "Sir, you once made this statement, 'Wicked One, I will not become fully extinguished until my spiritual life is successful and prosperous, extensive, popular, widespread, and well proclaimed wherever there are gods and humans.' Today, your spiritual life is successful and prosperous, extensive, popular, widespread, and well proclaimed wherever there are gods and humans. May the Blessed One now become fully extinguished. May the Holy One now become fully extinguished. Now is the time for the Buddha to become fully extinguished." So here we see Mara coming to the Buddha and asking the Buddha to now enter parinibbana, to become fully extinguished. And Mara says, at a previous occasion already, he asked the Buddha to become fully extinguished. And later in the Mahāparinibbāna Sutta, we learn that this previous occasion was straight after the Buddha's enlightenment, when he sat under the Bodhi tree. Then Mara came and asked him to straight away enter parinibbana and to not teach his dhamma. And we see that the Buddha replies that he won't enter parinibbana until he has monk disciples and non-disciples and laymen and laywomen disciples who are competent and who are well educated and practicing well and attaining all the attainments that they should have. So until the Dhamma is available to everyone, and we clearly see he doesn't make any distinctions between gender here. And it was also fully clear to the Buddha straight after his enlightenment that he would have a dual sangha of monks and nuns and a fourfold community with laymen and laywomen. And so the Buddha didn't need to be persuaded to establish a nuns sangha, as we see in some other later texts, or as is claimed that he was hesitant to have nuns. Very obviously here, he says very clearly he did not make any gender discriminations, and he never had the intention to make any gender discriminations. So whatever gender you are, male, female, non-binary, agender, transgender, or something else entirely, the Buddha didn't have any kind of intention to discriminate against anyone. And then the Buddha continues. The Buddha says to Mara, relax, wicked one. The final extinguishment of the realized one will be soon. 3 months from now, the realized one will finally be extinguished. So at the Chapala tree shrine, the Buddha, mindful and aware, surrendered the life force. When he did so, there was a great earthquake, awe-inspiring and hair-raising, and thunder cracked the sky. So we see here the Buddha agrees with Mara that all the 4 assemblies are practicing well and have attained everything that they should have attained. And the Buddha has reached all his objectives, that his teaching became widespread and popular. And he feels that he is now in a good position to actually enter parinibbana. And he consciously relinquishes the life force. That's apparently something that Buddhas can do and can control. And he knows that from now on, in 3 months, he will become fully extinguished, enter parinibbana. So now we are going to skip a few chapters. We'll skip chapter 16, 17, 18, and 19, and also half of chapter 20. In chapter 20, Ananda finally comes to the Buddha and begs him to stay on for the eon. But the Buddha says it's too late now. He has already relinquished the life force. So there's nothing he can do about that anymore. And we continue reading after that. Come, Ananda, let's go to the great wood, the hall with the peaked roof. Yes, sir, Ananda replied. So the Buddha went with Ananda to the hall with the peaked roof and said to him, Go, Ananda, gather all the mendicants staying in the vicinity of Vesali together in the assembly hall. Yes, sir, replied Ananda. He did what the Buddha asked, went up to him, bowed, stood to one side and said to him, Sir, the mendicant sangha has assembled. Please, sir, go at your convenience. Then the Buddha went to the assembly hall, where he sat on the seat spread out and addressed the mendicants. So, mendicants, having carefully memorized those things I have taught you from my direct knowledge, you should cultivate, develop, and make much of them, so that this spiritual practice may last for a long time. That will be for the welfare and happiness of the people, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. And what are those things I have taught from my direct knowledge? They are the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of psychic power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 awakening factors, and the Noble Eightfold Path. These are the things I have taught from my direct knowledge. Having carefully memorized them, you should cultivate, develop, and make much of them, so that this spiritual practice may last for a long time. That would be for the welfare and happiness of the people, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. So here we see, after the Buddha knows that he will now be fully extinguished in 3 months, he gathers all the mendicants together again, and his intention again is to lay down the foundations of his teaching to make sure that people know what his teaching is and what to preserve for the future. And we again see here he is teaching the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, the 37 wings to awakening. And we've already encountered that 2 weeks ago when we read the Samagama Sutta. And in the Samagama Sutta also, the Buddha talked about the fundamentals of his path, and he asked Ananda, where he mentioned those 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, and he asked Ananda, are there even 2 mendicants in my sangha who make differing assertions about these things? And Ananda says, no, everybody is fully clear on these 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas. There are not even 2 bhikkhus in the entire sangha who make differing assertions about these. And still the Buddha teaches them again to make sure that everybody understands the fundamentals of the path. And we see that everybody should cultivate them. If we cultivate them, then the spiritual practice will last for a long time, for the benefit not only of our own benefit, but the benefit of all gods and human beings. So then the Buddha said to the mendicants, "Come now, mendicants, I say to you all, conditions fall apart, persist with diligence. The final extinguishment of the realized one will be soon. 3 months from now, the realized one will finally be extinguished." So this is obviously a very, very famous saying of the Buddha, conditions fall apart, persist with diligence, or in Pali, vaya dhamma sankara, appamadena sampadeta. This is extremely famous because these are also the very last words of the Buddha. This is the last thing he said before he entered parinibbana. So his kind of legacy. This is the shortest summary you could give for the Buddha's path, the Buddha's dhamma. So conditions fall apart, obviously, is a reference to the 3 characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and non-self. So conditions fall apart. Obviously, falling apart is a direct reference to impermanence. But also, since everything falls apart, there can also not be a permanent self. So the reference to non-self. And since everything falls apart, everything is unsatisfactory. So the reference to dukkha is also there. And then persist with diligence is, of course, the injunction to practice, to keep on going, to keep on arousing energy, to not giving up. Even if it's difficult, we just pick ourselves up and we just persist. And as long as we walk in the right direction, eventually, if we don't give up, eventually we will have to arrive at the goal. So that is what the Buddha said. And then the Holy One, the teacher, went on to say, "I've reached a ripe old age, and little of my life is left. Having given it up, I'll depart. I've made a refuge for myself." So I think this line is very beautiful. I've made a refuge for myself. And whenever I read this line, I think whenever anyone reads this line, we should just pause for a moment and ask ourselves, have we also made a refuge for ourselves? So are we spending our time wisely, or are we just pursuing meaningless worldly things that we are going to lose when, at the latest, when our body breaks up and we have reached a ripe old age, or even when we're young and death comes? Do we have a refuge? So we cannot take anything with us. The only thing we can take with us are the qualities of our mind. And obviously we can make a small kind of refuge by cultivating good qualities. But the only real refuge, the big refuge, is only when we reach stream entry, or even better, arahantship. Only then do we have a proper, strong refuge. And the Buddha here says, of course, he is the one who has made a refuge for himself. And with this poem tries to inspire us to also make refuges for ourselves. And he continues, diligent and mindful, be of good virtues, mendicants, with well-settled thoughts, take good care of your minds. Whoever meditates diligently in this teaching and training, giving up transmigration through rebirths, will make an end to suffering. So there is the refuge right there. The end of suffering is attainable by practicing the path, being of good virtues, settling our thoughts, meditating diligently. Then the Buddha promises us there is an end to suffering. So then the Buddha robed up in the morning and taking his bowl and robe entered Vesali for alms. Then after the meal, on his return from alms round, he turned his whole body, the way that elephants do, to look back at Vesali. He said to Venerable Ananda, Ananda, this will be the last time the realized one sees Vesali. Come, Ananda, let's go to Bandagama. Yes, sir, Ananda replied. Then the Buddha, together with a large sangha of mendicants, arrived at Bandagama and stayed there. There the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, not understanding and not penetrating four things, both you and I have wandered and transmigrated for such a very long time. What for? Noble ethics, immersion, wisdom, and freedom. These noble ethics, immersion, wisdom, and freedom have been understood and comprehended. Craving for continued existence has been cut off. The attachment to continued existence is ended. Now there are no more future lives. This is what the Buddha said. Then the Holy One, the teacher, went on to say, ethics, immersion, and wisdom, and the supreme freedom. These things have been understood by Gautama, the renowned. And so the Buddha, having insight, explained this teaching to the mendicants. The teacher made an end of suffering. Seeing clearly, he is extinguished. And while staying there too, he often gave this Dhamma talk to the mendicants, such as ethics, such as immersion, such as wisdom. So again, we see the Buddha teaching the fundamentals of his path, again teaching Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. And we've seen this passage so many times already in the Mahāparinibbāna Sutta. It just occurs over and over. So I think we can see the Buddha really, really wanted to make it clear that these are the fundamentals of his path. And the text continues. When the Buddha had stayed in Bandagama, as long as he wished, he addressed Ananda. Come, Ananda, let's go to Hattigama. Let's go to Ambagama. Let's go to Jambugama. Let's go to Bhoganagara. Yes, sir, Ananda replied. Then the Buddha, together with a large sangha of mendicants, arrived at Bhoganagara, where he stayed at the Ananda shrine. There the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, I will teach you the four great references. Listen and pay close attention, I will speak. Yes, sir, they replied. The Buddha said this. Take a mendicant who says, Reverend, I have heard and learned this in the presence of the Buddha. This is the teaching, this is the training, this is the teacher's instruction. You should neither approve nor dismiss that mendicant's statement. Instead, you should carefully memorize those words and phrases, then check if they are included in the discourses or found in the text on monastic training. If they are not included in the discourses or found in the texts on monastic training, you should draw the conclusion, clearly, this is not the word of the Buddha. It has been incorrectly memorized by that mendicant, and so you should reject it. If they are included in the discourses or found in the text on monastic training, you should draw the conclusion, clearly, this is the word of the Buddha. It has been correctly memorized by that mendicant. You should remember it. This is the first great reference. So here again, the Buddha is teaching us how to practice at a time when there is no Buddha around. So clearly this is also very relevant for practice nowadays. And as we know, the Buddha did not appoint a successor. The Buddha said that we should only be guided by Dhamma and Vinaya after his passing. So here he tells us how we should deal with the teachings of other people, especially if they claim the authority of the Buddha. So here in this first case, the first case here is not a case that we actually experience today, but it's something, of course, that could have come up in the early Sangha. So this is the case where somebody had heard a teaching directly from the Buddha, before the Buddha's passing, obviously, and then passes on that teaching to others. And then others are not supposed to evaluate that person. So they shouldn't look, does he or she or they seem like they know what they're talking about? Is this a charismatic person? Is this a well-learned person? Is this a knowledgeable person? Is this a person who has practiced for a long time, who has been ordained for a long time? All this is entirely irrelevant. What you should do is you listen carefully, and then you compare it with the suttas and with the Vinaya. And if it matches, you can keep it. And if it doesn't match, you have to discard it. So, of course, in order to do that, we need to know what the suttas and the Vinaya are. And we have to have the trust that the suttas and the Vinaya that we have today are the authentic teachings of the Buddha. So again, we can see the importance of the first council, that meeting of the monks after the Buddha's parinibbana, to collect all the teachings and to have an authentic version that everybody agrees on and that everybody makes an effort to pass on to later generations. And I think in later generations, throughout the centuries and millennia down to nowadays, we have a very huge debt of gratitude to the first council for preserving the Dhamma, because if these efforts had not been there, and if there had not been an effort to produce an authentic version and to pass that on to later generations, it's very likely that the Dhamma would have been lost within a few generations. But because the teachings were collected and because there was the effort to pass them on, we still have them nowadays. So that's quite an amazing accomplishment after more than 2,500 years, and something we should be hugely grateful for to the Sangha who has passed them on for such a long time. And so, yes, so there is a duty of every single one of us to actually learn the suttas and learn the Vinaya, especially for monastics to learn the Vinaya, so that we can actually compare and we know whether something aligns with the Buddha's teaching or doesn't align. And then the Buddha teaches a second reference. Take another mendicant who says, in such and such monastery lives a Sangha with seniors and leaders. I've heard and learned this in the presence of that Sangha. This is the teaching, this is the training, this is the teacher's instruction. You should neither approve nor dismiss that mendicant statement. Instead, you should carefully memorize those words and phrases, then check if they're included in the discourses or found in the text on monastic training. And then the same thing. If they do not agree, you have to discard the teaching. If they agree, you should keep it. And this is the second reference. So in this case, this is a case that can actually come up today and also does come up very regularly today. There's somebody who says, well, the Sangha in such and such place of this famous monastery or that famous monastery, teaches in such and such a way, so that must be the teaching of the Buddha. In that case, also, you can't just rely on the authority of that sangha or on that person. No matter how senior they are, no matter how famous they are, no matter how many followers they have, still you compare it with the suttas and the vinaya and make up your own mind and discard anything that is not in line with the suttas. So that is the second reference, and then there is the third reference. Take another mendicant who says, in such and such monastery, there are several senior mendicants who are very learned, knowledgeable in the scriptures, who have memorized the teachings, the text on monastic training, and the outlines. I've heard and learned this in the presence of those senior mendicants. This is the teaching, this is the training, this is the teacher's instruction. And then the same thing, we compare it with the suttas and the vinaya and make up our own mind. So the difference here between the third reference and the second reference is that in the second case, there was a sangha. In the third case, there are several senior mendicants. And a sangha is defined in the Vinaya as a group of fully ordained monastics, so bhikkhus or bhikkhunis, more than four bhikkhus or more than 4 bhikkhunis. So if it is less than 4, it doesn't count as a sangha, or if it is more than 4, but it is a mixed group of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, then it also doesn't count as a sangha under the Vinaya. So the third case is a group of less than 4 fully ordained monastics. And again, the text says they are very learned, they are knowledgeable in the scriptures, they have memorized the teachings and the text on monastic training. So we might think, oh, they've already memorized everything, we don't need to check ourselves. But the Buddha still says we still have to make up our own minds. And the text also mentions the outlines here in Pali that is called the Matika. And that could refer to 2 different things. One thing it could refer to is the Patimokkha's, that is the lists of rules for the monks and the nuns. And in that case, they would not be included in the text on monastic training, and the text on monastic training would just refer to the explanatory material of the rules and also to all the monastic procedures, for example, the ordination ceremony. And the other possibility, what the word matika or outline could refer to, is lists or excerpts from the suttas with the basic categories of teachings. For example, we have just seen the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, which is such a list, such a matika list. Probably these excerpts were made for the ease of reference and to memorize them easily. So it's much easier to just memorize the 4 Satipatthanas and the 4 right efforts and the 5 faculties and the Noble Eightfold Path, for example, instead of memorizing all the context and all the stories around and all the similes around. So if you just want to focus your meditation practice on that, then it's much easier if you have those kind of lists. So those kind of lists would have developed in the early Sangha already, probably, because it was just a very handy tool for teaching. And much later, those lists developed into the Abhidhamma literature. So many centuries later, those lists were the basis for Abhidhamma. But the Abhidhamma only started to develop, or only fully developed, in the sectarian period of Buddhism. So centuries after the Buddha's passing. So that's why the Abhidhamma isn't mentioned here in this list, in this enumeration of qualities of those senior mendicants. So that is the third great reference. And then the fourth one is, take another mendicant who says, in such and such monastery there is a single senior mendicant who is very learned and knowledgeable in the scriptures, who has memorized the teachings, the text on monastic training, and the outlines. I've heard and learned this in the presence of that senior mendicant. This is the teaching, this is the training, this is the teacher's instruction. You should neither approve nor dismiss that mendicant statement. Instead, you should carefully memorize those words and phrases, then check if they're included in the discourses or found in the text on monastic training. If they're not included in the discourses or found in the text on monastic training, you should draw the conclusion, clearly this is not the word of the Buddha. It has been incorrectly memorized by that senior mendicant, and so you should reject it. If they are included in the discourses and found in the text on monastic training, you should draw the conclusion, clearly this is the word of the Buddha. It has been correctly memorized by that senior mendicant. You should remember it. This is the fourth great reference. These are the four great references. You should remember them. So the last case is where there is a single monk taken as the authority. And again, we cannot rely on any external person, no matter how famous that teacher is, no matter how senior. And the Buddha really here expects of every single of his practitioners that they are well versed in the suttas, and of the monastics also to be well versed in the Vinaya, so that everyone is actually capable of making up their own mind and of telling false teachings apart from the correct teachings. So every single practitioner should be deeply familiar with the suttas, and it's not enough to just have a cursory acquaintance or to pick 2 or 3 suttas that you like and to dismiss everything else, or to base your practice only on 2 or 3 suttas because that's the ones you like and your practice doesn't actually align with the other ones and you don't actually understand the other ones. But it's actually up to every single practitioner to deeply study them so that they're actually capable of applying these 4 references and making sure that they're not getting misled by all the teachings that are out there, which may be in line with the Buddha's teaching or which might not be in line with the Buddha's teaching. And of course, now we are 2,600 years after the Buddha, so a lot of false teachings have arisen in the meantime, and it is up to us, every single one of us, to make up our own minds. And the Buddha very much encouraged us to do that, and very much encouraged us to inquire and investigate, and even investigate all the very senior monks and nuns, and to not just blindly believe and follow anything. So it's important that everybody takes responsibility for their own path. And I think we've been going for a while. So on that note, I will end the sutta reading for today, and we will finish the Mahāparinibbāna Sutta next time. So next Tuesday again at the same time. And for now, if you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat, and I see a few comments or questions are already there. Let me have a look. So I see a few more people have joined. Hello, Gita, nice to see you. And hello, Stefano. Hello, Gurgle. And Gita says, Aya, could there be other Buddhas still alive in a form of energy? So, well, there are differences of opinion, of course. I know that you are also reading Mahayana Suttas, and in the Mahayana, definitely other Buddhas are around. And so my personal opinion is after the Buddha has entered parinibbana, they are no longer around. Also not as a form of energy. So they're actually no longer present in samsara. What is, of course, possible is that, there are other world systems, other universes out there, and Buddhas could be alive at the moment in other universes or other world systems. But in our world system, as long as this present dispensation of the Buddha Gautama is around, there will be no other Buddha. And only after this, after we've completely lost the Dhamma, then the next Buddha, the Maitreya Buddha, will arise. So, and Gita also says, I have heard Bhante Bodhi try to describe the deathless, where is no birth or death, a state of unborn. So I think you're referring to Nibbana probably. When you say the deathless, that's usually a synonym for Nibbana. So yeah, I think you're just referring to Nibbana here. In Mahayana, it's believed that these great beings are all around us, guiding us, sort of bodhisattva in a 7th stage or above. Yeah, as I said, that's a Mahayana teaching. It is so wonderful to see Aya. We pray for your safety and good health. Thank you very much. I hope that everybody else is also safe and healthy. And Stefano says, does this request by Ananda also appear in other versions of the suttas? For example, the Chinese Agamas. If it doesn't, it would make it more likely that it's a later edition. So yes, it does appear also in the Chinese Agamas, but we know that the Mahāparinibbāna Sutta is a composite sutta anyway. So of course it has been edited by later generations, because it tells us of events after the Buddha's parinibbana, for example, what happened to the relics and how they cremated the body and so on. So clearly this sutta has been edited, and a lot of things were added to by later generations. And as you've seen today, we have skipped quite a few passages, and some of these things, if you read through them, you'll see that they seem quite out of place. So these seem to have been later additions also. So it's very clear that a lot of editing has happened, and that the Mahāparinibbāna Sutta was expanded over time. That's why it is so long nowadays. And Kumu says, that was great to have the first council soon after parinibbana. Did Buddha advise to have something like that to Venerable Ananda or Mahakassapa? Just wondering. So the Buddha advised his disciples to frequently meet together and to recite the Dhamma and Vinaya. So he advised everybody to do that, not just the monks. So his hope actually was that the fourfold community, so monks, nuns, laymen, and lay women, would come together and recite the suttas together to preserve them for posterity. That didn't quite happen. The monks did it all by themselves, which is one reason why the suttas are as they are nowadays. So we have very, very few teachings given by nuns, for example, and we have very few teachings given to nuns, for the simple reason that the nuns were not represented at the first council, so their teachings couldn't be preserved. And also the nuns' Vinaya is extremely short as compared to the monks, with very little explanation, also because the nuns weren't present to give their text, and because the monks obviously didn't have a practical knowledge of the nuns' Vinaya because they didn't practice those rules. That's why the nuns' Vinaya is treated quite superficially in the canons as we have them now. So yeah, the Buddha advised for the fourfold community to often recite the suttas together. So those sutta studies that we are doing here on the channel are actually sort of following this injunction of the Buddha to come together and to study the suttas. Of course, nowadays we don't recite the suttas on this channel, even though monastics still recite and memorize suttas. So until this very day, we still memorize suttas. And there are people who have memorized very large parts of the Pali Canon. But I think those sutta studies are something that the Buddha would definitely approve of, and he would definitely think that was in line with his advice how to preserve the Dhamma. And Gita says, yes, Aya, we do owe a great debt of gratitude for the preservation of this most profound Dhamma teachings. Yes, I agree. And hello, Paula, nice to see you. And Paula says, is there a link that can be accessed ahead of time? Yes, the link is always in the description box. So whenever we put we put the live streams on YouTube. You can always check the description box, and the links should usually always be there. And Sake, or Sake, I don't know, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, says, do arahants suffer bodily? So yes, last time we read about the Buddha being ill, and the sutta, in this Mahāparinibbāna Sutta, in an earlier chapter that we read last time. So it described how the Buddha was very ill, and it described he had a lot of very strong bodily feelings, and there was a strong pain, but that his mind was unaffected. And so there's often the simile of the dart, or of the two darts. So if you're not enlightened, then if you have bodily pain, it's like being struck by two darts. You have the bodily pain, but at the same time you have all the mental anguish and worry, which is the second dart, and you constantly fixate on the pain and you hope it will go away. And your mind is constantly directed to the pain, and you check, is it still there? And my medicine isn't working, and why isn't it working? And why didn't that quack doctor give me a better thing? And so you're making all these stories and all this papancha about the pain, which makes the pain a lot worse. So that is the second dart that unenlightened people struggle with. But when you are an arahant, you no longer have that second dart. So you have bodily pain, but you don't have the mental pain. And I see, hello, Naval. Nice to see you too. I'm glad you enjoyed the teaching. And I think that was the last comment for now. We'll just wait a few more seconds to see if something else pops up, and otherwise we might end for today. So I think that's all for today. We will continue this sutta next time. So I hope to see you all again next Tuesday. And we will finish with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join me if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See you all next week.